Very warm welcome to everyone who's here today, considering the weather is a bit scary outside. My name is Deepika and I work at the archives at NCBS. The archives is a public collecting center for the history of contemporary Indian science. We collect from across STEM fields, so that the last 150 years or so, from across the country. And I'll hand over to Suhel for introductions, but I guess you all know the talk that you're here for today, and promises to be super exciting.
Thank you, Deepika. Thanks to all of you for coming. We're really taken aback by this interest, so let's hope that we're able to keep your interest through the hour that we have for this. My name is Suhel. I work with the Nature Conservation Foundation. I'm an ecologist, and I try and get more people interested in natural history and birds and the natural world in general. And of course, we have with us today Aasheesh Pittie. If you look at the photo, you'll see he's a man who ages in reverse. No, that's not him. Aasheesh, I've had the privilege of knowing him for 35 years or so. He's been my mentor as well, growing up. Me growing up, not he. He is a bird watcher, I guess, first and foremost, but also a writer, a researcher, a bibliographer, an editor of an ornithology journal. And just to, so he's got a variety of interests, but mostly to do with birds and with natural history. And he's published 2 books, I think, on bibliography, that is compilations of books on birds, bibliography of books on birds. He's written a book himself recently, which is a compilation of his popular writings. It's called The Living Air, and I can't recommend it highly enough for all of you. Through the course of this, so Aasheesh has been active for about 50 years in the world of birds in India, in all these various capacities. And what we're going to do is double that time period and look back 100 years, over the past 100 years, and through his eyes and his correspondence with people and his interaction and his reading and his bibliography, try and understand how the bird watching scene in its various forms has changed over that period of time. We're going to try and do things a little bit differently today, rather than having a conversation first for 40 minutes or so between Aasheesh and me, and then turning it over to all of you for questions and interaction. We hope to intersperse some interaction through various points in time in this 1 hour. So thanks, Aasheesh. It's an honor and a privilege. And I should also say, by the way, that Aasheesh is of the generation and of the character that keeps all his correspondence, pre-digital and also post-digital. And the archives from his correspondence are now hosted in the NCBS archives together with a number of others. And hopefully we'll touch upon a little bit about his material that's in the archives, and perhaps some others as well to do with birds.
So here, sorry to interrupt. I think there's a button that's maybe not on. I think the sound isn't
There's a
coming
button
from
that's
the
on.
side.
Okay. I could hear my voice. All right. So we'll start again. Aasheesh is one of the few people we use. I supposed to do. No, we won't do that. So Aasheesh, I think we'll start off asking you what this century of birds in India bird watching in India has looked like. You know, from the first quarter of the 1900s to now the first quarter of the 2000s. How did we start off? What are the kind of people who were working at the time? What sorts of things did they do? And can you trace a little bit of the progression since then until the present day?
So at the outset, I'd like to thank NCBS for having this program, for hosting my papers in their collection, and for all of you for coming here to listen to us. It's a very large question that Suhel has asked, and though I am not qualified to talk on it, but I can touch on a very macro level and tell you what I think about what has happened. If you take ornithology in India in the early 1900s, most of the work that the British did with Baker, etc., and the For Now British India volumes coming out, all of you may not be aware of people and subjects that I speak of because they are a bit dated, but bear with me. These were people who were working on Indian birds for a long time, and the focus in a way shifted almost entirely onto Salim Ali, whose name all of you would have heard. And even though Salim Ali was a great note taker and he sort of highlighted the behavioral aspects of birds, and he was doing these collections for royal families in various erstwhile states of India. But his collections, though they went to perhaps the British Museum or wherever, or sometimes according to contract, part of the collection remained in the state that he was collecting in, they were actually worked upon by a gentleman called Hugh Whistler, who was with the Indian police at that time. And Salim Ali's notes and Hugh Whistler's very detailed taxonomic notes and information comprise the literature from that period that we know about. There was a survey along the Eastern Ghats called the Verne Scientific Survey of the Eastern Ghats, which also happened. And what I am trying to get at is that ornithology wasn't the popular birding photography thing that it is today. It was individual based, it was institution based, it was based on the passion of a person who couldn't be in the field but had the money to support some activity that people did. So the Verne survey was one such thing, a very large project where a gentleman called Verne provided the money, and a person called Lapesson, who worked for the BNHS, I think, did the collection. Salim Ali was not involved, but the collection was sent to the British Museum where Claude Ticehurst did the taxonomy, etc., and Whistler did the notes. And it was very readable, even though it was a technical paper. It was so readable. If you are able to get hold of them, they are all online, those papers. You must read. Birdwatchers, you must read. You learn about the art of observation, or the art of writing, and the art of synthesis of knowledge that comes, and new knowledge, how it is married to that. So these were things that
you mentioned collections. So was most of the work then about shooting and collecting birds, sending them to museums, and then subsequent kind of taxonomic work was done on the. Is that the majority? Because you did mention observation as well.
Yeah. So at that time, most information on birds was collected from a dead bird. I mean, they didn't have field guides which were good enough, and they didn't have optics which were good enough. They didn't have identification skills which had developed enough to identify a bird from far away. And museums also wanted specimens. Museum didn't have specimens. New areas were being discovered, were being conquered, etc. And anything that came from such countries or places was material for museums in the West. So most of the birds that they spoke about or wrote about and identified were birds in the hand that had been shot in the field. And it's not that one crow was shot. If he was there, if Salim Ali was there, maybe he shot a series of 30 crows. In the Himalayas, maybe they shot a series of 50 civeas or something. That comprised part of the collection. That was how birding was studied at that time. And the intricacies of taxonomy, etc., you knew only through a series of specimens rather than just one. So that is what collection meant at that time, and the papers had the information that so many birds, so many specimens were collected of a species. They were numbered, so very well catalogued and identified by sex if they could, or even whether the bird was in a breeding condition or not. There were a lot of details that went into those papers. This is what the collection was about.
And so after that, so maybe if we go on to post-independence and so on, when you started, what kind of changes in this process of gathering knowledge, what sort of changes are there?
So even when I started birding in the very late 70s or mainly in the early 80s, information was very hard to come by. all we had was Salim Ali's Book of Indian Birds, which we all cut our teeth on. And those who could had the handbook that he had worked on, a huge 10-volume work. But otherwise, there was the Journal of the Bombay Natural History Society, and there was this lovely little newsletter that came out from Bombay at one time, then Bangalore, called the Newsletter of Birdwatchers, which the late Mr. Zafar Futehally edited and wrote up. And besides this, there wasn't any other literature available to us. There was no internet, and there were no birdwatchers close by whom we could relate to, talk to, exchange notes. So if we happen to be inspired, I use the word because that's what I think converted many a lay student into a birder at that time. Somebody inspired you, maybe a lecture, somebody came and lectured in your school or college, or you read an article, whether in a few popular magazines also, I only recall the name of the Illustrated Weekly of India from those days. I can't remember any other magazine that was available to people. Newspapers hardly carried anything except for L. Krishnan's long-standing article column in the Statesman. How many of us, that came out in Delhi, how many of us had access to the Statesman? So literature was rare, friends, fellow birders were rare. So it was an inspiration from somewhere that struck a spark in you and you wanted to do it. And once you did it, it was like magnetic. One just became a bird watcher, and optics were hard to come by. Even binoculars at that time were not of good quality, but one pursued, and one wanted to write something that one saw and get it published in a newsletter. And the newsletter for birdwatchers was the one that we went to. But what I feel is that once published, that bug really bit you. Because then, people commented on what you had written, and you were really encouraged by what others were doing. You wanted to try and emulate them in the field, copy what their methods, because they were doing it from a part of India, but not from your area. So you wanted to show what was happening in your area. This was what was happening, and there were very few bird watchers who had access to material, to reading material, and who published at that time. And those who published in these journals were also a handful. The same notes kept, the same observers were writing from wherever they were.
So I think that distinguishes ornithology or the study of birds generally from a lot of other disciplines where amateurs, those who aren't, for whom it's not a job, still have contributed to the literature and continue to do so. Is that something that's been around all the time for this last century, where we have strong amateur contribution? So birdwatchers, I suppose we say, there's a taxonomy of that, birdwatchers, people go out and watch birds. And then we've got, if we just take the ends of the spectrum, then we've got ornithologists for whom studying birds is their livelihood. They get paid for it. But then there are a lot of enthusiasts for whom this is not a livelihood, who go beyond just the watching of birds, but actually documenting, maybe doing projects, doing surveys, things like that. So can you say a little bit about that spectrum and how that has changed over time?
Ornithology, especially on the continent, on the subcontinent of India, of South Asia, has and still is the domain of amateurs. I don't think ornithologists have ventured too much into what, by ventured maybe a wrong word, but made a dent into what the amateurs have contributed over the years, over 100 years, over 200 years. Academic ornithology came very late. Most of the people who have written the major books that we still refer to were not ornithologists. Salim Ali himself became a doctor much later in life. At that time, maybe when he collaborated with Dylan Ripley, that would have been the first injection of an ornithologist into the scene. Every other big name in the late 19th century who has written books that we follow and on whose shoulders Salim Ali and his work stood to a large extent. The great contribution of Salim Ali was his personal behavioral observational notes of each species. But so these were it's mostly amateurs who have contributed, as you say, unlike other fields. And it was also, hunting was a passion. So where did this come from? Hunting was a passion with the British. It became a passion with the Indians. And recording what they hunted rubbed off in a way, because they wanted to portray that they have also seen this, they are also in their area. And observation, perhaps more meaningful ecological papers, if I may say, started appearing in journals. I suppose as a reflection of reading in Western journals, because you don't see this type of writing in any Indian language also. There are no Indian language notes on birds from that era at all. All are in English.
Sorry, which era are we talking?
Let's say the early 1900s. Before that, of course, there wasn't anything. But even when there wasn't
60s or so.
Even 60s, up to the 60s, 70s. Maybe only with, I can only recall Professor Neelakantan writing in Malayalam for birds of Kerala. So, what else did you ask?
Yeah.
I lost you somewhere.
No, it's about the spectrum between amateur and professional. But so then the question, I want to open it up as well, but just before that, what is the motivation, do you think? So we can ask you maybe first about your motivation. Why did you get so deeply into this, and so deeply that you are felt motivated to contribute knowledge, not just as a hobby, something personal to yourself, but similarly right from the early 1900s, people for whom this was not a job or a profession or livelihood. Was it fame and glory? Was it a sense of discovery of new things, or a sense of contributing back to something they loved? What do you think is this motivates people from moving from being birdwatchers along the spectrum to actually contributing knowledge back to the world?
So I think any hobby is a very individual affair. It's in a way a very selfish affair also, if I may say so. And in that time, when socializing and friendships and the ease with which people socialize today was not available, at least to me it was not available. So and I was a loner, I was an introvert, and there was this situation that opened up through a talk by a friend's father, who was related to Salim Ali, but he came to school and spoke to our students. And then he said, why don't you all come boarding with me one day? So I was in the 10th at that time. So I said, yes, let's go. A few of us did go. And I enjoyed it, I liked it. And surprisingly, I was into mammals at that time, and it was the era of posters and stickers and patches on jeans, etc. And WWF had come up with these lovely large posters of a panda, leopard cub and a lion cub and all those things. I learned about the hobby of natural history, that there was such a field, that there were organizations that worked towards it, etc. On the little blurb behind the poster, where they said WWF is an organization, it has a newsletter, an office. So I go to WWF, subscribe their newsletter. In that newsletter, I read about Salim Ali and about the newsletter for birdwatchers. Then I became a member of the BNHS, because I had gotten, so I became a member of the BNHS, and my dad bought me the Book of Indian Birds, and I took his old half-a-ton binoculars into the field, and it started raining, but then there was this bee eater on a wire, and I was using his guide to identify, and the lapping came. So I was completely hooked to birds. And then in Salim Ali's Book of Indian Birds, he talks about the newsletter for birdwatchers. And then I wrote to Zafar Futehally. And they were master communicators, You write and 3 days later, Zafar Futehally's letter comes back. So, the fact that this boy has written to one among the pantheon of bird watchers in India at that time, and that man has taken the trouble to reply, just cements the passion to the effort that is there. And I just wanted to go ahead. And very early I realized that the only information, as I said, was through these 2 or 3 books, and but information was coming every day. The journal was printing new information every day, the newsletter was printing every day. And there is this nature of journals before the internet came where it was published and forgotten. Unless you were specializing in the field and you wanted to pursue that knowledge, it was forgotten in the racks somewhere and nobody knew. How do you retrieve that information? How do you get hold of it? What happens after the handbook? I mean, the birds are still out there in the field, there are bird watchers. So I started this, for myself I started a very simple system of writing, indexing every single article that I read about the species to find out. That's how it grew.
I see.
And it just, you know, I stuck to it. That's all.
Okay, so the bee-eater, by the way, is something that you mentioned, I think is what we call today a spark bird, is the first bird you see that really sparks off your interest. So those of you who are interested in natural history of birds, we can think about what your spark bird, not everybody has a spark bird, but the bee-eater was yours in this case. And in your case, I guess it's, you can't identify, I mean, there's a spark, and then it was just a gradual deepening of your interest and engagement. Of course, spurred by a desire for fame and glory, I'm sure. I'm joking, you don't have to answer that. So I think this is a good time to stop. Lots to talk about, of course, but good time to stop and get any sort of questions for Aasheesh from the audience. Maybe particularly, we'll come to the present day in a bit, so let's not talk about that right now, but a little more about times past from the early 1900s to maybe the 1960s when Aasheesh started. If somebody would like to add something or to ask something. So yes, at the back. So if you raise your hand, I'll call on you. And I think we have some mics that can do the rounds. So there's one question right here. Is there somebody else who can take the mic around? Somebody right at the back.
When you said you went birding for the
I think you need the mic because they're recording it. Sorry.
You said you went birding for the
right.
first time when you were in school. Which area was this? Where did you go birding?
So I lived in Hyderabad, and it was around Hyderabad that we went to. And exactly the place I live in today is an area called Banjara Hills. There are no hills left except the up and down because of the landscape. It's all built up. But a stone's throw from where I live, there used to be a small pond. And Hyderabadi landscape, I don't know if you're familiar with, but it is this Deccani landscape full of boulders. It used to be at one time. Now they've moved away about 100 kilometers from Hyderabad. But these boulders had small, borrow pits in which water collected and a little patch of reeds. So we went birding there. And I saw the red munya, and seeing a red munya is like a ruby coming into your life from somewhere. And it was all very nice. And the man was able to talk about them and his experiences. He had ringed birds in Bharatpur with Salim Ali, and so many tales he told us. And so there was this for a boy who didn't go on shikar, who didn't go into the field. Bird watching is a sort of hunting where you track and photography is nothing but hunting now. Without something being killed. So bird watching also was in a way like that, where you wanted to follow it, you wanted to see it, and it was never, for me personally, it was never checking off a bird on a list. It never was, it never is even today. But for many people it was, even at that time, ye dekh liya, chalo, what is new, let us go and see something else.
Yeah. There are of course many flavors of bird watching.
Absolutely, yeah.
We have yes.
Yeah, I have a question here. So circling back to hunting, I found it very interesting when you mentioned that pre-1900s and 1900s onwards, there are very few records of vernacular writing about birds. I was just wondering why you may think that is, considering when it comes to stuff like mammals, we do have records from, say, shikaris from back in the day, or folks engaged in hunting, or from royal families, royal courts, etc. Why do you think birds were sort of left out? Was it just the fact that they weren't like a prized trophy?
No, I don't think it is that. I think that they were not easily accessible. Like today, why do you have so many bird watchers but not as many people interested in dragonflies or butterflies or toads or frogs or lizards? It's because birds are in such vast numbers and visible everywhere, and you just have to raise your head to look at a bird. But I think that is one of the reasons. And also, as a society, I think we didn't have it, we had other priorities in life rather than do birding. Shikar and recording about mammals there was this precedent of the royalty sort of encouraging it, and all that goes with it. And there was something you could show. But if other than Salim Ali, if somebody took a gun and blasted a bird, they'll only would have got a handful of feathers, I suppose. They wouldn't have been able to even stuff it properly. So that could have been one of the reasons.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that. There are old references to birds and natural history generally and in literature, but not in the depth that it started in the 1900s.
If I may, as a sport, birding, birding as a sport where falconry, I'm talking about falconry, or cage birds are concerned, that was very popular. One of the earliest records on falconry is a Sanskrit book. Yeah, it's from so quite an ancient book. I can't remember the year, it was 1500s or something. But falconry is a sport of kings and princes, blah blah. So it was very popular. And otherwise, as a game, you hunted birds to eat, basically.
Yes, please.
Good evening, sir. Earlier, what you said about observation, learning how to observe, that struck me very powerfully, because the foundation of good science is good observation. And if indeed ornithology is in the domain of amateurs, I think you need to observe well. And it's something that struck me when I read your writings as well. Even the mundane, what we would miss as mundane, is explained very beautifully, whether it's in the flight pattern, whether it's the way the bird moves. So my question is simply this: how did you learn how to observe? Who taught you? And what to observe?
So, I didn't find anything mundane. That was the beginning of it. Everything, and I wasn't ambitious to, as I said, find new birds. I was happy to look at the same magpie robin every day of my life. I'm not, one who will go. And the more you watch something regularly, every day you'll see something new about it. Just like they say, you don't step into the same river twice. It's the same with observing natural life. And never forget, there is this, what's it called, something like a brain-blood barrier which you cannot, with nature you cannot break that barrier. At least I haven't come across a way where you can interpret what's happening there. You cannot understand what's happening. They cannot communicate to you. Neither a butterfly can communicate, nor a newt can, nor a bird, nor a lion. Nothing can. It's all your emotions you are trying to look at from various angles. And that is what actually, every new angle that you view a bird or an animal with, that is what encourages you to watch more, because it's revealing this to me today, what will it reveal next.
It's kind of interesting. I think if I can add a little bit, in Europe in the 19th century, there was a lot of natural history being done. And a lot of the behavior that people saw and the patterns they saw in nature were used as lessons for us, for humans. They either taught us some moral lessons, mostly because they are supposed to reveal the intent of the creator. So it was called theological something, I forget the particular name. So we are interested in nature and natural history because of what it reveals about divine creation and about our place in that divinity. And of course, now we may not think in that way. We are trying to think about the bird in its own terms, not simply interpreting what birds do as lessons or morals for us. But there's a major a barrier there because we can't communicate with them. And there's this lovely a clip of a Tibetan monk saying Om Mani Padme Hum, and there's a magpie robin on top of a water tower singing, and he's like, it's Om Mani Padme Hum. And you can feel the delight in the monk's voice and his heart, but of course you have no idea what the bird is feeling at that time. But it's lovely to imagine that the bird is actually responding
And perhaps if you're of a religious bent, you might say the bird is responding in fact to the
Vibrations or
the
whatever.
divine intent of the but to each their own, I suppose.
No, but new things are revealed, you know. I mean, as one grew and learned more about birds, a lot of the fallacies or the wrong information that one got as so talking about Dasera, when the ruler is brought in and done puja and things like that, the priest will sit there and say, "ये Brahman pakshi hai, ये कुछ नहीं खाता है, ये तो अनाज खाता है, घी खाता है." So I said, well, I told my brother, what if I tell him what it actually eats? He'll get up and run away or what? And then this thing about, you know, monogamy between, you know, that they pair for life, etc. For many things, it's not true. And you know, it's happily raising another family in 2-3 other places, but it need not be in one place. So many of our so-called truths were shattered as one learned about.
I think in the writings of people in those days, the 1900s, they were talking about, especially when they were describing behavior. A lot of the part of the charm of the writing is they're ascribing intent. You know, the cuckoos are evil and malicious and so on. Of course, cuckoos are just trying to make a living, right? They're just putting their eggs in other birds' nests. They're not evil or malicious. They don't, those are human emotions. Or, you know, the love and so on. And of course, presumably animals and birds do feel some kind of emotion, but we don't quite know what they are. But then to take the lesson, we should look to birds as examples. They are monogamous and so on. And of course, we know now that most so-called monogamous birds sneak around a lot. But that's a topic for another day. Is there any other question right now for Aasheesh?
So we're just taking off from your monk and
yes.
I don't know if many people know, but the nightingale is a songster which is considered to be the most famous. I think the magpie robin is a good competition to it. But in the 60s, I think, the BBC had a famous recording where this cellist went out and sat in her garden. And she said that this nightingale comes and sings to me once I play. And they said, no, we must record this and broadcast it to the entire world. And she sawed away at the cello for some time. And then they almost gave up. It was getting to be dark when the birds started singing. And they recorded for several hours. And for many years it was replayed again and again. And now there is another guy who does it, and he has a musical company and he sort of earns out of it. And there is a nightingale in his backyard that sings, and he jams with it in a way.
I see.
Yeah. There are videos of it on YouTube.
Okay. Well, yeah, make of it what you wish. Okay, so I'll come back then to our conversation here. So you got interested obviously as a boy in school, and then your interest deepened. We also spoke about this spectrum between amateur and professional and everything in between. And I wanted to ask you particularly about the journal that you founded, co-founded and edit, which is called Indian Birds. Because I think that somehow spans this spectrum. And I wanted to ask you what is the intent behind that? What were you hoping to achieve when you founded that journal? And now it's 15 years, something like that. It's a long.
Almost 20 years.
20 years.
Our 20th volume.
20 years. So what was your intent then in terms of enabling the communication about birds through a kind of a journal format?
So, Mr. Zafar Futehally was instrumental in establishing that. Shantaram was another one, and all three of us, we decided that we needed a new journal in India. And I very strongly felt that science should be brought to a reader who's a non-scientist in language that that person can understand. And that was the primary intent of the newsletter. It was started off as a newsletter for ornithologists, because Zafar was actually involved in another newsletter called Newsletter for Birdwatchers. So in his wickedly funny way, he said, let's up the game by calling it ornithologists. Now it will sound a little more, that we have graduated. So we started that, came out for 1 year as one volume. After that, we changed the name to Indian Birds. And the idea of it was to have primarily scientifically vetted articles, but written in the language that the layman or the layperson could understand. That was the idea. And to encourage people to write about birds of the subcontinent, though it largely is about birds of India. And we tried not to reject any article. We rewrote many articles which in their normal form could not be understood or published, etc. And it got on. We brought in reviewers from all over India, even people who lived in India but continued living abroad, even they contributed to it. And there were historical notes in it that, Zafar Futehally wrote. He mined the old newsletter for birdwatchers from the 50s and the 60s and selected material from that. Kumar wrote about his time and how things have changed over time. So there was some historical context, but there was a lot of new writing happening. There were checklists of areas that came in, species observations, a lot of records of new sightings from new locations were coming in. And it has grown over the years. We have then we said that why not do monographs? Because within 20 pages you can't publish too much, and there might be material that is available written by amateurs that we want to publish as a monograph. So we went into monographs, and I think 4 or 5 monographs we published. Delhi birds was there, Maldives was there, identification of some seabird was there, I forget. So it's now I don't edit it myself. We have Praveen Jayadevan who leads it, and there are 3 other editors, all professional. Praveen is not an ornithologist with a PhD, but the other 3 are, because you see, a lot of writing, scientific writing today in journals is more mathematics, statistics and graphs than it is the type of writing that I grew up with understanding. So manuscripts that were coming in were, in cricketing term, bouncers for me. I didn't understand much about it. So I'm very happy that these people have taken out and they are now, since...
So would you say one of the intentions is to, you wanted to appeal to amateur birdwatcher audience? Is the reason for that to kind of also demonstrate to them or to encourage them to themselves begin making observations, contribute them? In other words, move them along this spectrum to become a little more serious, a little more like contributing back to the knowledge of, or is it just for their enjoyment?
No, actually both. There was on the very peripheral view, there was the fact that another journal was available for the amateur to write in, where there was just the newsletter, and the journal of the BNHS did not publish a lot of material that people may have sent. They wanted to maintain above a bar, they wanted to maintain a standard. So besides that, there was another venue to publish. The fact did remain that when I edited articles and sent the manuscript back to the, I called it a bleeding manuscript back to the writer, subsequent papers that they published were much higher in the standard of writing, in the way we understood it, in the way we wanted them to write. And so that was, we thought that, that was a way of encouraging them to better themselves in the way they observed and wrote. That happened a lot with a lot of authors. So that was one thing that the Indian birds did achieve in a way. And seeing so many Indian authors, Indians write in a journal which was widely advertised. And with internet having come, it was available. We did a massive subscription campaign, underpriced it totally. We got all those things happened. Then ultimately, from after about 15 volumes, we said, or earlier, after 12 volumes, we said we'll make it free for everyone. So it became an internet PDF-based journal that people subscribe. That it just sort of snowballed into a birding family.
I'm looking at the clock and time is kind of running away with us. There's several things I want to ask you, and then we also have more audience interaction. So quickly, 2 things I want to ask you. One is about how the social makeup of birding has changed over the years. So, what kind of social backgrounds did birders used to come from, and has that changed now? Gender, other kinds of social change that we see, and first that, and then I also want to ask you a little bit about technology. But maybe first the social makeup of people involved in this endeavor.
So social media has been the game changer in birding, and the digital age especially. But before we come to that, I think interactions between birders was very limited. It was through publications, it was through memberships with institutions that the aam aadmi could not easily enter. So, can you come again?
Yeah, so there were not many aam aadmi earlier. Was it more kind of elite, westernized pursuit sort of thing? And is that any different now? By earlier, I mean, like, for example, when you started.
It was just something, things were not available to us. That was the constraint that we had. They were not available to us, and we had to build on whatever little we got. And that is how it progressed. And we made friends when once a year we met in some conference, and it would be expensive to go to a conference. There was no institutional support. We just went on our own out of interest. And if you there you made friends, and there you met people whose work you had read. That was the only socializing of birders that happened. It's totally different. Today, I mean, there are all birders from every field. You see, all ornithologists are birders. There is no doubt about it. Because you don't call yourself an ornithologist without seeing a bird, right? Whether it's a pigeon in the lab or a sparrow in the lab, you have to be. But all birders are not ornithologists. But so today, as I said, the digital world has changed everything. The whole world is on your phone, and whatever you see, you can report, and you are appreciated or whatever corrected immediately. And photography has become affordable. People are able to buy cameras. Travel has become accessible, easy, cheaper. And if in my time, if I wanted to go to Sikkim to birdwatch, I had to do a lot of preparation. See old checklists, try and get hold of, those who wrote a trip report on Sikkim, try and get hold of them. How did you go? Where did you go? How did you stay? Today, all you have to do is contact a guide in Sikkim. You call a few friends, there is a guide there. You know nothing about birds. Sikkim is a great place. You have a new camera, you want to explore, you are just fond of it. You go there, get hold of that guide, he takes you to the best of places, birding wise, and you have, so that is a huge, booster, huge enthusiasm generator for a person who wants to get into birding. And lots of the photographers who go out today are like that. It's a good thing. It's a good thing for ornithology and birding, because the more photographers out there, the more birds they will see, the more distribution records we will get, perhaps new species also.
Yeah.
That is one major difference. The other is that comes under technology.
Yeah, so we did cover a bit of it. So the fact that there's, people in these various places, both an outcome of there being many more people, also many more kinds of people. Like I feel that back when I was start birding, the biggest towns in India, biggest cities, the players, had bird watchers, and if you went to a smaller town, you might not have found somebody interested in birds. But now, I think that pretty much every town has got at least one bird watcher, sometimes even an organization. So that's quite remarkable. And that's a combination of, it's a kind of feedback between the technology and the connectedness, optics becoming cheaper, digital photography, various things like that. So good. I think we have a bit of time. Let's see if we run out of questions, we can come back. I have still a few more questions with me, but back to the audience here, please.
So if I may just return to the history of the birding and share a couple of personal reflection. I want to expand a little bit about what Aasheesh talked about, the newsletter for birdwatchers, and the absolutely vital role of Zafar Futehally in creating a community. So in the latter part of your conversation, you talked about internet and social media and virtual technology and how the community is created. I'm a little older than Aasheesh, probably several years older than Aasheesh. So I started my father subscribed to the newsletter maybe in the late 60s, 66, 67. And I grew up in Dehradun, which of course is important in the history of Indian birds because Salim Ali did. I think the first draft of his book was written in Dehradun. But what about other things? He mentioned Neelakant, K.K. Neelakant from Kerala. He mentioned Lav Kumar Khachar from Gujarat and Kathiawar. But there were other names. So there was P.D. Stacey from Assam. There was Peter Jackson from Delhi. There was my father's colleague Joseph George, who wrote a major, fantastic checkbook on checklist of the birds of the FRI at Dehradun. There was Jamal Ara, on whom Raza Kashmir is an excellent article. Now you're creating a community before the virtual age. Now, if you think, I suppose I can't see behind me, but Aasheesh and I are probably on the older end of the spectrum, and the majority of the people here don't know what technology was used, not to print, but to present a newsletter for birdwatchers. It was not print, it was not even type, it was cyclostyle. Now no one really knows what that is. You know, a machine you go and somehow you print 300 copies and 300 more, and you stick and paste it and post it, and that's how you get. It's completely different from. And so what Zafar did was to create that community, and the other people took it forward. So Peter Jackson had a circle in Delhi, and Neelakant was promoting stuff there, Krishna in Madras and so on. So I think it's quite extraordinary. And I think Aasheesh and his colleagues have taken it to the next level. They built. He said rightly that Salim Ali stood on the shoulders of the British naturalists who preceded him. But what Aasheesh and now Shantaram and now their successors are doing is just building on what Zafar did. And then remember my last point, and then I'll stop. When I listen to this, your conversation, and I think of my memories of reading the newsletter for birdwatchers in Dehradun in the 67, 68, 69, when I was 10, 11, 12, 13. And I think of these names starting from different parts of India. They actually introducing. I was never much of a birdwatcher. The first ever article I published was the newsletter for birdwatchers, which is a separate issue. But what the newsletter did was to introduce me to the ecological and cultural diversity of India. Which was impossible. Just think of how else would you get it? You certainly wouldn't get it. So I thought that I just wanted to just give a shout out for Zafar and Motia.
I encourage all his friends to write. Those who have moved out also of India also, they wrote. And he used to say, once he told me, when they came to India, the carrot was that you can stay in my house if you wrote an article for the newsletter. So lots of people wrote like that for him.
It's kind of interesting.
One more I want. You had asked how thought process have differed from that time. I'd like to talk about one quality of Zafar Futehally, which was he was a great thinker out of the box. At a time when the whole world was talking about science and conservation, this sanctuary, that sanctuary, he came up with the idea: why can't we have sanctuaries in areas which were no man's land, between conflicting nations, Siachen Glacier, between the two Koreas. Anyway, it's no man's land. Declare it into a sanctuary. At least let the birds thrive in that area. He pursued it with in the UN. He pursued it with ambassadors. Of course, nothing came out of it. But he used to think on a very large scale, completely out of the. Which I don't find happens today. It has its other reasons because there are too many problems involved. But in today's leading conservationists, we are so bothered about what's happening in the country. We are beset with so many problems with our environment. This leap of getting out of it and thinking on larger issues is a little lacking.
I was also struck by when you're talking about the Zafar Futehally building community through the newsletter. And the sense, there might have been a few hundred subscribers to the newsletter, most of them wrote for the newsletter, operating in an information vacuum, so to speak. You knew all the people. If you met them at a conference, you'd be really excited. And the contrast today, where we're information overload, right? You've got all the information you want at the stroke of a key on your laptop. So what is the nature of community? It must be very different. We have WhatsApp group, Facebook, and so on. There are communities of a different sense. But I suspect what you mean when you say community in those days and what we mean today is utterly different. And also the kind of
I don't know, sort of challenges as individuals that we face. Maybe at that time you said multiple times, we didn't have access to information. You know, who read the Statesman? And now maybe the challenge is the reverse. What do we make of all this?
This is connected. Sorry. You could not. I read Krishnan because I grew up in Dehradun and the daily edition came there. You know, a few hours late, but it would, no, but in Hyderabad would take 4 days. Right? So now, so that kind of, and I think one last thing, what they needed in was to create this community and then create these proselytizers or missionaries. So Nilakantan proselytized in Canada, and P.D. Stacey in Assam, and Peter Jackson in Delhi. So these micro communities were created well before the age of social media, and I think that was probably one of the effective contributions.
And that was the birdwatchers Facebook at that time. There was the correspondence sometimes was more than the actual articles. Right. There were issues where there were 4-5 pages of just correspondence. And imagine Shantaram writing about Adia, what's happening there, and Lav Kumar commenting on each and every one of his articles in a very positive way. And all of us waiting, what will Shantaram see next, what will Lav Kumar say next, what will Meluish write next, or Zafar Futehally. His editorials were legend. He used to write marvelous editorial. So all these things were the only reading material we had.
So of course we're hearing from these gentlemen all the good things, but as you know, whenever you have multiple people with the same interests that come together, there are also conflicts, which is not a topic for today, but there's lots of juicy stuff to discuss and know about all the personality clashes and all the other kinds of conflicts.
Well, I think there's a question.
Yeah, we'll go to another question.
Just dwelling on technology for a bit, we were talking about how now it's easy for birders to come together and stuff. But again, with technology, there are great things like eBird and stuff, but also things like playbacks being used when people are going out for big years and stuff. So I mean that's controversial, I suppose. But do you think there are any other detriments that have kind of crept into the practice of bird watching with increased adoption of technology?
So Aasheesh, before you answer that, let's just see if there are any other questions and we can see whether we could combine them before we run out of time. Yeah, we have 2 more. Yeah, maybe Chris. Or you're closer to the mic, perhaps you can go.
Yeah, it's a corollary
to. We've recently started birding, and we have this. I do the photography, she does the counting, and cataloging. My wife, and what I find is there is this bird paparazzi concept which is happening now. So you go to lakes around Bangalore, or you go to any other places which are supposed to be birding paradises. You have a huge bunch of photographers coming there, and of course you see a lot of them focusing on a particular bird or a species and stuff like that, and heights coming up and all that. Are we changing the behavior of birds, what we started off with in terms of what you measure, because of the interventions that humans are having? Or is this just too far out concept?
We'll take Chris's question and then I'll try and summarize.
Okay, well, probably builds on that a bit. But I like the term spark species that you mentioned, and the topic of what sparks people's deeper interest is something that I find very fascinating. And I just wanted to ask, how that spark and deepening of interest has evolved, and how obviously it's affected by the technology that we now have. I'm sure the photographers who that maybe their spark that builds into a deeper interest is one route, but I just thought asking you guys what you feel those sparks are. Well, I'm particularly interested for now, of course, as to what we can for today, yes, because that's where we need to focus, and I'm sure it's something that you give a lot of thought to, Suhel, but and your team. But yeah, just to discuss that a bit more, I think would be very interesting.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one last question there, and then I'll kind of summarize it.
So I just want to build up on that. Do you think that with the technology and everything, the content of what you used to discuss earlier without this Facebook and digital media and everything, photography, so widely acknowledged nowadays. Do you think that the actual content of discussing the birds and what matters has changed with, and in what way is my question?
Okay, so just looking at the time, we have license from Venkat, I think, to go over a few minutes. So I think these are sort of related, but they go off in two directions about the engagement with birds today, mediated and encouraged by technology like photography, playback, things like that. What potential downsides there might be for the birds or the people, and is there a counterbalancing advantage or benefit again to the birds or the people from there? Yeah.
So I'll take Chris's question.
My question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I try to summarize it.
So a spark bird, in my mind, even today, is the one that you see the most clearly. It can be a crow, but if you see a crow from far away and you see the same crow through lens, through binoculars, and you see the gloss on its plumage, you will see a different bird. Like the bee-eater, I used to see, but when I saw it through the binoculars, it jumps at you, and that's what actually clutches your heart. And there are situations where, I know a couple where this gentleman is sitting and a golden oriole flies through their open drawing room and veranda. And he is shouting, Shanta, Shanta. You know what's happened? There's a bird, it's flying. He said, yes, birds are meant to fly. What's wrong? He had seen a golden oriole. So, at such close proximity, when you see a bird, it hits you. The colors of a bird, if you see it in the hand, totally floor you. A red-vented bulbul, if you see the red of that vent in your hand as opposed to seeing it in the field, it's a totally different experience. So good optics, view through an optics is, I think, essential. Unless you see flocks, if you see a huge flock of flamingos, if you see some starlings in the sky, that is something else, some poetry that happens, and they might become your spark birds.
So that's what the technology helps, including the playback that he was talking about. Is that what you mean? So you also, this question about playback and its.
So that is a fraught question, and one can say if ornithologists use it, is it all right, and if birders use it, is it not all right? That is a question that time will tell, and how much of a difference it is making in the field. But I may be wrong, but I think there are studies which have shown that it really does not affect birds' population so much. I don't know about areas, let's say the Bougainvillea, Arunachal is highly visited, and people want that bird, ticket off their shopping list, we have to see it. Maybe, and it's a very small population. Maybe it will affect that population, maybe it will affect the habitat it lives in, because so many more feet are going through, pushing aside, pushing. God knows, but only time will tell the difference.
I think Isha was asking about the kinds of conversations that happen, the sort of what.
So I think the level of conversation and information has really gone up. Everybody has access to everything in the world today, and information is available at various levels of depth, which absorbing which depends on your time or capability or whatever. So I think there is a much wider, more intelligent conversation happening today than it used to happen. Because at that time, even if Suhel, being the ornithologist, said that that would be the benchmark. I didn't have any information to ask him a question, why is it like that? Today everybody asks. On eBird I said, I get queries, is this record alright? Can you prove it was your record? So those things happen. There are people who are out there who know what they are talking about.
And maybe I'm wondering if that's a outcome of the access. So back in the day, people was a curator of a museum. That person has access to the skins, nobody else has access, so very difficult access. And so their word is law, right? Whatever they say goes.
Yeah.
Now,
right or wrong.
Now it's right or wrong. And now the access to information is much more widespread. It just requires a little time and dedication And so there isn't just a small group of experts with a capital E. Actually, all of us can meet because we have access. Is that one reason why that level of discourse has increased, do you think?
I think interest also has increased because of the ease of information and the ability or the opportunity to contribute to that information, whether through photographs, whether through observation, whether as a group itself we are going and observing things. That has made a lot of difference. And with the increase of knowledge, the desire for more knowledge is there. So they want to go, even now people talk of going to BNHS to see specimens. If they see a bird in their area, they want to see how it is in the hand, whether there is any some specific details are there that they are missing out. So these are ordinary amateur bird watchers who want to do these things.
Yeah.
Which didn't happen earlier.
So nice positive feedback. The more you know, the more you want to know.
Most certainly.
Okay. I thought that was going to be a good place to end, but there are some questions.
There was one more question. So
Bird watching is more democratic now than what it used to be.
Yeah.
Because
it's more widespread.
Went to a senior to get a bird identified.
Yeah.
But an youngster who spent few years in the field can just come with the
So we don't look up to seniors as much as we used to. and I think Subhu welcomes that, by the way. Huh? Correct? You do, I think. Yeah. So yes, Misha, you had a question, and then from the back, Sonia, I think, and Uma. Okay, these three will take those that be our last questions. Yeah?
And after that, we can continue over snacks outside.
Over to you, snacks.
I have a very straightforward question. You talked about people wanting to go to BNHS to look at specimens. So are there places in the country where we can actually go and look at specimens or like old red birds?
Yeah, there are.
And look at the red band of the bulbul?
Yeah. The BNHS has perhaps the largest bird collection in India. But
they let you browse?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
And I think the Zoological Society of India has in Calcutta and perhaps in various stations, I'm not sure. But there may be some red tape involved where you have to take permission. BNHS you can go and ask. And there are museums around the country. Chennai has a museum where there is specimens. Maybe you can't hold the bird in your hand, but you can see it from very close. Specimens are very old. Sometimes you'll be shocked at, if that is the first time, if you're seeing a pitta for the first time as a museum specimen, then you'll say, no, this can't be an Aurali bird unless you see it in a
Faded. Because collections have stopped for a long time.
Yeah.
First time I was ringing birds, I held a bulbul in my hand. I was shocked out of my wits at the color. I never imagined, it was red, I knew, but it was bright red, shiny, amazing. And that contrast with the white and the black and the brown.
Sonia, maybe Uma, we'll let you have the last word.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering, what is it about birds that manage to capture the imagination of so many people and bring this community together? And why hasn't it happened, for example, for insects? Because a lot of the things that you're talking about, this marvel exists, the colors and all of that for insects as well. And I was wondering whether the insect world could learn something from the bird community. Because the value that interest has for science in general, for curating data sets, is invaluable. So I was wondering what your thoughts were about that.
So I think interest in insects has increased manifold. Though not as much as birding, but there are a lot of groups of butterflies, people who go out for butterflying or for dragonflies, dragonflies, all sorts of insects. There are groups all over the world, and with iNaturalist, etc., coming in, it's an app where you photograph any living form of, any life form. There are experts who will identify you. That's a great tool for encouraging people to, do more of this. So also the fact remains that birds are a little easier to see than insects are. That is a deterrent, and birds make you look up at life. Insects you cannot see, so you cannot look up, observe them so much. But I think that is the main difference. Birds are relatively more easier to watch. They are everywhere. For an insect, you'll have to, lots of people don't like insects. Fear of getting bitten, the fear of some reaction happening, and the very fact that it's not easy to watch an insect. And you can see birds, you can see movement in the bushes, but imagine a tiger beetle or you imagine a fruit fly. You have to have those tools where you attract them to yourself rather than. So I think that is the only reason. Otherwise, insects are a marvelous group of animals.
Oh yeah, obviously. I would just say maybe birds are a little more relatable than insects, so that we see more of ourselves in them. Like with mammals, obviously more, but it's harder to see mammals. You see squirrels around in terms of wild mammals, but it's harder to go see mammals. Much easier to see birds. They're warm-blooded like us. They kind of look somewhat like us. They do. I mean, they put, the eyes facing forward, and they move their heads like we do, and they feed each other and they coo and peck, and so it's actually quite relatable, I think. More than a butterfly, which is very colorful and so on, but a butterfly is a bit of an alien being, no? And let alone all the others.
And also, most of our literature has a lot about birds rather than about insects. So we get a lot of inspiration from.
You mean the cultural
literature that we have, that we read about. Yeah. I mean, it's surprising, but if I may extrapolate, if you take a season, then take the monsoon. You have birds related to monsoon, the koel calling. You have a petrichor, our what's it called? Mitti ka atar, which is related to the monsoon. You have ragas from the monsoon. You have mudras from the. So Indian culture or world culture has incorporated bird life into its expanse much more than it has insects. I mean, Indian music, they will sing a khayal which has frogs, but there's no cricket in it. There is a bird and there is, dadar, bole, all that comes in, but I doubt whether there is a house lizard, It's a fact.
So, but we have to overcome that. I take that point, yeah. I think just the time for one last point of view.
Is there time? Yeah, just quickly. So, it's amazing to see this exponential growth in the number of bird watchers and people engaged with biodiversity in this way. But do you think there's also some responsibility, given that we know there are biodiversity declines? There's this group of individuals. Do you think that they should have some responsibility, or do you think it's just we watch birds, they're very beautiful, and we enjoy nature? And that's it.
No, absolutely, that's a very good question. I didn't do it myself, though I tried for some time. The responsibility I feel that bird watchers have is to record the habitats that they go bird watching in. We don't know what habitats, over time how habitats change, we have no records. And every generation sees a habitat and they feel it's been like this always. That's not the case. It's a it's called, what's it called?
Baseline.
Yeah, shifting baseline all the time. So what my dad saw, what his grandfather saw as forest around Hyderabad, I don't see. What my children or grandchildren will see. They will always think that there was only 2 lakes in Hyderabad, not the 400 that we recorded. ICRISAT has a list of so many lakes. So that is the thing that is very, very important. And I think there are so many institutions in India. None of the institutions wants to tap on this huge volume of people to guide them in a way where natural history is recorded in a proper form. It happens in England. There is a very large movement with eBird and what Suhel does, and with Birding India that happens, and the seasons, what's it called? Season watch that Suhel and his people are doing. That's a magnificent start. But even then, I think institutions should use the amateur, group of people to form, not policy I would say, but to direct the way natural history is recorded in India, so that it can be used for the future, like the State of India bird report that comes out. We don't know what's happened to, we can say today birds are vanishing. Now that's just a statement. We don't know what it means. We cannot quantify it. We cannot say how many species. We cannot say which species. Crows are vanishing in Hyderabad. Why are they vanishing? How do I know? Because I have watched for some. But today people will think, no, this is the population of crows always. They wouldn't know that. Vultures is a case in point. You know, even today people don't believe that we used to see 200, 300 in Vanasthali in one of the dumps. But that's a very stark reality, and I think that is as essential as photographing the bird and putting it up, to say, no, I went to this area, I saw these birds, and here is the landscape I bird watching. I think that is very important.
So thanks, Aasheesh. So I think this is a call to action for mobilizing people together, or banding together, or towards a common purpose. Aasheesh spoke about the importance of institutions in this country to step up and facilitate that. This is an institution, so we'll let people put two and two together. I think this is a good point to close. Thanks a lot, Aasheesh. That was very interesting and enlightening. And of course, we'll continue the conversation outside over tea and some snacks.
Thank you.